Lucky you.
36 best
Tuned
holes in
into
golf.
Alternate Shots podcast,
Barney's Army.
where we talk about golf,
Sandy.
poker,
James Bond.
horse racing,
Double.
classic movies.
Zenyatta.
We have no script.
Down the stretch they
And
come.
we are glad you joined us.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. Welcome to our podcast. Today we're going to go a little bit outside the lines of what we normally do, talking about Wingfoot. We have a special guest today, Alvaro Saraleghi, who's a giant in the media world and a person I've known since I was 8 years old, probably 9 years old, 10. Alvaro Saraleghi came from Cuba in the early 60s when I got out of there in the nick of time from everything I learned as a kid. And I believe you were like 4 or 5 years old when you got here, Alvaro?
Yeah, I was 4 years old.
How did you get from 4 years old, escaping from Cuba, to loving golf? That's a long trip, right?
That's a circuitous route, yes. Golf really was something that there were two major factors. One was at Sports Illustrated, where I was my third job out of college, but I was 26, 27 years old. And I started in sales. Friday afternoons, you were to take clients out and play sports with them, up to you. Basically, it was tennis and golf. And I played some tennis, and I was curious about golf, and it was the dominant sport among the folks at Time Incorporated, not to mention Sports Illustrated. So I ended up, trying to pick it up so I could entertain clients, etc. The other factor was my father-in-law wasn't a great golfer, but liked the game and was a member at Wingfoot. He would invite us over there, and I had heard that it was a pretty good track. Probably got several of the members angry with the slow play. Between those two, I ended up becoming a huge fan of the game. We launched a separate golf edition in the magazine, and I was the publisher at the time with the editor's name was Mark Mulvoy. And this was an edition that went to basically people who had self-identified themselves as golfers and that they played 24 times or more a year. So it went to them, and it was almost like a mini magazine. We had the technology that we could identify who the people were as the magazine went down the print run. So if you were a golfer, you would get this section. If you weren't, it would skip you.
Wow.
And
wow, that was ahead of your time.
What year is that?
That was in the early 90s. It was a technology called selective binding. But really what it was, I mean, by today's standards, it was more hyper targeting. And it was a huge hit. I mean, we sold out the advertising, and we didn't charge for it. It was free if you were a subscriber and a golfer. But it was, I think the first year we had something like $20 million in revenues.
So who's your father-in-law that belonged to Wingfoot?
His name is Al DeCrane.
Okay.
Al wrote a letter for me when I was joining.
And so he got thrown out because he got you in, Billy, and because you played golf, Alvaro, slowly.
Well, it might be one of the reasons they didn't let me in.
Well, Siwanoy is an old Donald Ross course. It's been touched up by a couple of different people over the years. How do you like it now versus when you originally joined?
I love it. It's I mean, I was on the board for 6 years, and while I was there, the president was very aggressive as far as upgrading the place. So we, in a period of about 8 to 9 years, we put in a whole new pool, had the golf course redesigned, and we just finished rebuilding the clubhouse. So it's virtually a new place. The course itself, which I think is maybe more interesting to your listeners, it's a great course. The idea was to take it back to its roots, that what Donald Ross has as the architect. I would say the one thing that people will complain about is that the greens are very fast. That's on purpose in order to defend the course, because it's not a long course. But there's also it's rather hilly on the greens as well, or there's
undulations.
So as you know, when you add undulations to a very fast green, some people are going to think it's unfair.
it's not fair to compare Donald Ross to a Tillinghast or a Siwanoy to Wingfoot, but would you be willing to stake 10 of the best putters at Siwanoy against 10 putters from Wingfoot? Play a course somewhere, a few holes at Siwanoy and a few holes at Wingfoot, and see who comes up the winner?
If the Siwanoy guys were allowed to drink before the tournament, I would
Absolutely.
absolutely.
But I know a bunch of guys at Siwanoy that can putt with anybody.
Yeah.
Let's do that one, Billy. That might have all the earmarkings of a great little inter-club event.
Gauntlet.
So this picture goes back to 1964. You were in America 4 years, because I think I saw that you came over, quote unquote, your mother said you were going to Miami on a trip.
We were, my parents, my family, because it was my dad and his brother and my grandfather, they had the largest trading company in Cuba, and it was big for all of sort of Latin America, despite this, Cuba's size. And they had large clients, mostly American, because of the proximity to the US. So people like Pepsi, International Paper, et cetera. They were, it was quite successful. And they, I think in the 50s, decided on a vertical integration strategy. So they were selling paper prices were down. So the way to get paper prices back up was to sell magazines, or sell more magazines. Rather than entrust that to the guys who owned it, they ended up buying the company and other magazines. And before you knew it, they were one of the largest publishers in Latin America, including a magazine called Bohemia, which was the news magazine. It came out of Cuba, but distribution throughout all of South America. And it actually outsold, I think, Time magazine 2-1. When I ended up working at Time Ink, ironically enough, two of the guys had been there, back in the day, and said that, they could never compete with Bohemia because how good it was, which I took pride in because it was the family business. But unfortunately, it's also a news magazine. So we were covering the political upheaval in Cuba. And my father was asked to, he at first was pro-Castro. The person who was running Cuba at the time was, viewed as more or less a gangster. No one really cared for him, enriched himself, and whatever he could do for himself, or sometimes to placate the United States, because the US had a huge role in everything Cuba did, he would. So eventually the people had had enough, the US had had enough. And when Castro came, to try to overthrow the government, and did so successfully, it was viewed as a positive thing. However, very quickly we started to realize that he was a totalitarian more than a communist. I mean, communism, I think, in some ways was something like a badge he picked up along the way to help fuel a relationship with Russia, which was obviously a communist country at the time. And the idea was that he would need Russia because the US eventually, like my dad, turned sour on where Castro was taking things. We started privatizing or taking back private like farms, agriculture, a lot of other things but started to come down hard on the press. At one point, my dad tells a story where he was brought into the government offices, and they had written a very tough editorial about Castro, and the guy put a gun down on the desk and said, "We want you to stop publishing this." He goes, "I'm not in charge." This is what my dad said. My father is, who at the time, conveniently enough, was in San Sebastian in Spain. We're Basque heritage. So they called him and they said, he explained the situation. He goes, "What do you want me to do?" He goes, "Essentially, screw them, keep publishing." So
Francisco says this.
Yes.
And
He's a tough guy because Basque people are tough.
No. And he's a whole nother podcast, but I mean, he was an orphan, left the orphanage when he was 12 to become a man, came in Argentina, and didn't succeed, came back to Cuba at age 14, and ended up being a truck driver, ended up buying the trucking company, and from that launched the trading business I just described. So he was an amazing guy.
Well, it's genetic.
They do not like to be told what to do.
It's genetic. It's genetic. And we haven't even heard about his mother's side of the family.
Yeah, totally.
I'm sure that's where the predominance of these big genes come from, right?
Don't get her started. But but just to go, I'm trying to make sure I don't leave a loose end, that after this altercation with the government, and then there was all sorts of things where we were obviously a well-known family. My mother would be out like going for a walk with she was 27 and had 5 kids, taking the kids for a walk, and the neighbors throwing stuff at us from their apartment buildings, and obviously the pressure was on, and my father wasn't sure what to do. Che Guevara was named president of the bank in Cuba. Che Guevara, by the way, was a doctor from Argentina, or I think he's from Argentina, but anyway, he was a doctor, not the guy you want running, what's the equivalent of the Federal Reserve for them. So at that point, my grandfather said, you got to get out of there. The CIA was interested in starting the magazine, this news magazine, again in the United States, because it was about to be nationalized by Castro. So we left as if we were going on vacation. Hence, when you mentioned earlier, Bob, that we were just going on a trip to Miami, it was viewed as a vacation, not a lot of luggage, because otherwise it would tip them off that we were, going into exile.
Not coming back, yeah.
Right. And then my dad stayed behind, had a party, invited Castro to show his loyalty, and 2 weeks later got a fake passport from the U.S. government and escaped to the U.S. And we ended up trying to decide where to live. We thought Bronxville looked like a nice place, good Catholic minority in a very waspy community. And he launched the companies all over again in New York with some funding from the CIA.
Billy,
Yeah.
I read, Billy and I are poker players, Alvaro. And so we look for tells. Getting hit in the bean by a rock from your neighbor.
Yeah.
I think the next thing your mother did was call the travel agent. So that's a tell. And then
well, my memory is interestingly from Cuba, where when in 1961, after Bay of Pigs, when we knew we were not going to go back, because at that point we still thought it was just a temporary thing.
Right.
Once it became clear that that was not the case, I decided I better memorize my memories, because I'm never going to go back there again. So I had like 7 to 10 memories from Cuba that I made sure I never forgotten to this day. When people talk about what it was like, I'll mention, or not necessarily what it was like, but what do I remember? I'll break that question into 2 parts. One is, what were the kids thinking? And then 2, what were the parents thinking? The kids, we were completely brainwashed. So we thought Castro was great. When we would see a helicopter go by, we were instructed to wave because it was probably Castro. Exactly. And that was just, at age 5, and my brother, 4 or 5, my brother was 7 or 8. That's what we would do. But I remember distinctly being, I think it was Rockefeller Center or so, all the flags, or maybe at the UN, but we had just arrived in New York from Cuba, and a helicopter, flew over us, and I waved and said hi to Castro. And my mother said, don't you ever. I mean, they had some friends who were in the army that helped bring Castro to power, who were then executed. One of the things Castro was trying to do is he needed more tractors. And it just shows you a little bit of the kind of guy he is. He would allow us to bring back prisoners of war in return for tractors. So he was trading human lives to help get his economy going, which, after 50 years of trying, he still has, or he's now dead, but never accomplished.
wow.
So now you're in the United States, and over time you developed a love of films.
I remember heated arguments over the benefit, the meaning and the importance of Clockwork Orange when I was 17, which
That was
isn't
one
the
of
typical 17.
Jorge's loved that one.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting to hear your perspective on this, because we never grew up having to, anything like what your first 5 years of life were like. Nothing like that here. We were all living, the life of Riley.
That a young kid would remember. One was my grandfather's house in Havana was a great house, had two pools, a saltwater pool, freshwater pool, and it was on the Caribbean. So the backyard was these pools, tennis courts, and then literally the Caribbean. So we would sometimes fish off of out of our backyard. I was, again, 4 years old, so I'm not going to be doing very well. So I was there with my uncle, and I snagged something. I didn't know what it was. I tried to bring it up, had trouble. I'm, again, being 4 years old. So he helps me. We bring it up, and it was actually an octopus.
Oh.
So we bring the octopus up onto the tile floor, which was, beautiful. My grandfather's house. My mother's looking at this from the house, and as I'm talking about it with my uncle, all of a sudden the octopus starts letting out ink, which is its defense, mechanism. So now there's ink going all over this white tile floor. And my mother yells, "Dios te libre, may God free you." She was pissed. And it was kind of like the only way to get I'm thinking, how do you get the ink back into the octopus? It's kind of like toothpaste. You're kind of screwed at that point.
Or how do you get it out of the white marble that your mother is so proud of? That is so cool. Imagine that house today, Billy. That's a $100 million house on the Caribbean, saltwater, freshwater, right?
Yeah, no,
Awesome.
It was fun. But not to jump ahead, but one of the questions I'm sure in the back of your head is, well, is the ink still on the pool?
What happened to the ink, Alvaro? What happened to that squid and that ink?
At Sports Illustrated, we created the best of Sports Illustrated issue. Just another way to bring glory to the magazine, make more money, and keep everybody busy. So it was something like the top 25 stories of all time. And the editors picked the guys, and off we went and created the issue. So one of the things we did is, in order to thank the guys who it's an honor, after all, we're saying your story is one of the top 25 or whatever the number was of all time. But to say thank you, we'll give you an honorarium of $2,500. And the way the copyrights work is that it's shared with the writers of Sports Illustrated. So Sports Illustrated have the rights to the articles, as do the writers. Everything was fine until this one writer said, "I didn't give you the right to publish my article." He ended up suing us for $5 million. And what had happened was he had an altercation with the editor, is essentially fired or left. And it lasted about 6 or 7 months. And then, we came to terms, and he came back to the magazine. During that 6 or 7 month hiatus, he wrote this piece. So he was actually right. We didn't have the right to it. So they went ahead and sued us. And the first thing they did is to change the venue from New York, which is where Time Inc. was, to Miami, which is where this writer is from. So we were going to go to trial. So we go to trial, and I am asked to testify as an expert on the business side, because what they said is that the subscriptions that we sold because of his article, the equivalent was $5 million worth of subscriptions. This is one article, one issue. There, it's a jury trial, and all of the, and in Miami, where they think they've got the advantage because the guy's from Miami, and the jury's to my left, I'm on the witness stand, and they're asking me these questions. So basically my answer was, they said, is it worth $5 million? And I said, no, because so we end up winning the case. And as we finish, a lot of the jury members come up to say hello to me and to clap me on the back, which of course people are sort of scratching their head. Why is that? And it's my cousin, is essentially at the time was the Oprah of Spanish language television. The last name Saralegui is very well known. Her name is La Rubia. Her name is Cristina. It was called The Show de Cristina on Univision. So I was basically a celebrity on the witness stand, which the plaintiff did not understand at the time, because Miami is like Saraleggi turf. So anyway, we ended up winning this case. So the editor who had screwed up, but I mean, it was an honest mistake, comes down to my office like a month later, and they're falling over themselves as if I had, created a miracle, that this whole thing turned around, that we won the case and blah, blah. We took them on, we didn't just pay them, etc. And he's like, we have no way of repaying you for this. He goes, so what we want you to do is to go down with one of our writers. His name is Scott Price. SL Price is the name you guys are probably familiar with on SI, to Cuba to interview their athletes for the '96 Olympics. It's a gift. So he gave me a bottle of Havana rum and then essentially my airplane tickets to go to Havana. Went back to my grandfather's house and I checked for the ink. It was gone.
Was the house still there?
It was a hotel. And this writer felt very awkward because he was going to be like, we're going to go to my home, which I haven't seen in 40 years. Obviously, it was emotional for me. And he's a great guy, very sensitive, and he's thinking, this is going to be tough on Alvaro. What should I do, etc. So we walk into the house, and there's a bar, and he comes up and he goes, let me buy you a drink at your grandfather's bar. And we'll start laughing, etc. He then put that in his book. It's called Pitching to Fidel by SL Price.
Was there any danger for you going back?
My mother was concerned. There were awkward moments when they looked at my passport when I literally arrived. I mean, one of the most amazing things was just like literally stepping, because there was no jetway. You stepped down on the ground. When I hit the ground, it just hit me that, oh my God, I've been talking about Cuba and its relationship, my identity essentially as a Cuban, my entire life. And to the point where it was almost like a story I was telling versus a reality. As my foot hit the ground, I was like, I'm actually hitting, Cuban soil. And it was just emotionally amazing for me. We walk into with our passports. I show them my passport, and there's this woman in fatigues with a machine gun, and she looks at it, and then she goes, essentially, oh, my baby. She goes, you were born here. And then she goes, let me give you a hug. So she gives me this big hug with the machine gun butt in my ribs. Yeah, I mean, all Cubans who do well, we take pride. For a while, it was the CEO of Coke, this guy named Goitzueta, another Basque. My mother's last name was Goicolea, so you can see how that they're close. They actually dated briefly in Havana. But it was that type of thing. If any Cuban, has success, we're all in.
What's interesting to me is growing up with you guys, as kids, we were still adapting to life too. So what was brand new for you was essentially brand new for us also, with the obvious exceptions of the first 4 or 5 years of your life and how that affected your new and ongoing life. But it's funny to think that you and my brother Neil went to school together in first grade. Is that when you arrived, or kindergarten?
Kindergarten, yeah.
So it was new to both of you at that time. The United States was new to you, but school was new to both of you at the same time. So
yeah, no, and we assimilated very quickly.
Oh yeah, you did.
So I didn't speak English when I arrived. I don't remember any transition issues at all. And we were, in fact, we were welcomed. The nuns at where we went to parochial school, St. Joseph's in Bronxville. I remember, I think it was in second grade, teacher insisted that like once a week we would say the Hail Mary in Spanish. And so it was something to be proud of, as opposed to something you tried to hide, which, some immigrants unfortunately have that experience. We won the lotto 6 different ways.
Well, you guys were accepted right away, as far as I know. I didn't ever see any kind of prejudice or snootiness towards your family.
No, if anything, it was the opposite. It was, people were incredibly gracious, welcoming, and love the story.
I was lucky enough to live 4 houses away, so you
I'm
guys
rooting for
became
you
an
too.
integral part of our lives very fast.
The actual reason we ended up in Bronxville is that the ink supplier for the magazines in Cuba lived in Bronxville. So when we escaped, a guy from International Paper took us to Canada to sort of wait out to make sure there wasn't people following us, and have a certain amount of time evolve before we actually went back to the United States, where Castro's people would know was our final destination. So after 6 months, we went back, and there was a family called the Leckies that lived not too far from Billy's second house in Bronxville. Mr. Leckie was my dad's ink supplier. So it was really just following connections that we ended up in Bronxville as opposed to Southwest 8th Street in Miami.
Who's the most interesting person you ever played golf with?
I could tell you the funniest guy that I wouldn't have expected, which was Brett Favre at a Pro-Am. The most sort of down-to-earth guy was Johnny Miller.
That must have been a treat.
And we played at Pebble Beach, and the story there was on 8, where you go over that big chasm. I think I was probably on my third shot. He was on his first, who knows? But we're up there, and I had just started playing golf, so it's a terrifying shot to begin with. And I asked him, I'm sitting there trying to figure out what to hit, and whatever the club that I should be hitting, I had no confidence in. So I was thinking, all right, and it's embarrassing, and you're supposedly an athlete, and with Johnny Miller. But then he goes, okay, now what you're going to do here is just reading my mind what it is that I was terrified. He goes get your ugly club. and I was like, what's an ugly club? And then he goes, the club you have the most confidence in. And for me at that time, it was like a 7-wood. Despite being a poor golfer, that was one club that no matter what, I could pretty much count on it. And I think it was more club than I needed, but he said, I don't care, hit that club. And sure enough, I hit it. I think I might have hit it slightly over the green, but it was over. And it was, it was a great sort of piece of advice that to this day, clearly, I've never sort of forgotten. And he was just that sort of fun, matter of fact, didn't give me a hard time. Just get your ugly club and whack it. I was playing with Dean Beeman in New Jersey for an NFL Pro-Am, and I was on his team. And I was 19 or something. I mean, I was, again, not a very good golfer. And he is paying me no attention. And anyway, lo and behold, I start playing pretty well. And I'm like, for me anyway, I'm like lights out. I'm parring a couple, sure, triple bogeying when they didn't really need me. But then, so all of a sudden, Dean Beeman takes an incredible interest in my game, and he will not leave me alone. He's following me. What are you thinking here? Are you sure you want to? You might want to try here. And he was like, and it was like white on rice.
Yeah, there go the pars. They're taking notice in my backswing.
Right. And you realize how competitive these guys were. Talk about Wingfoot. One of the things I say is that despite the reputation for being such a hard course, is that if you're playing well, it seems incredibly fair. And that to me was really a mark of a great course, that if you're not playing well, you pay a significant price there. But if you're playing well, I think it's very fair. So it's one of the things I loved about it was, I couldn't wait to try it again. And if I had a good day, to really enjoy playing Wingfoot on a good day.
This is not a hint, but I haven't played Siwanoy in like 20 years, since I was invited one time by John Judge to play in the powwow. We won it, and I never got invited back.
But this is not a hint either, but I can get either of you guys on either of those courses anytime you want. First PGA was at Siwanoy in 1915, was it? Or 17, something like that.
Yeah, I thought it was 16.
I think all the early guys did, because Siwanoy's most instrumental pro was a guy named Tom Kerrigan. He was there for 50 years, and he was instrumental in starting the PGA Tour and really the beginnings of the Ryder Cup. when he and a bunch of other pros from the United States went over and played some pros in England, probably in the 20s. But Kerrigan was still has the course record there, 61. He shot it on June 18th, 1941, I think, maybe 43. And one of the guys playing with him, a guy named Patsy Maselli, who was an assistant pro at Siwanoy when I was a kid, played with him that day that he shot 61. He said Kerrigan missed two or three or four footers that day. He said,
Wow.
of course, he made some bombs too, but 61, and that record still holds up.
This other business that my brother and I started, his name is Javi, about 10 years ago, and for a long time it was just sort of a website, but it's called Danger TV, and it's content that, as you can imagine, is dangerous. So the brand is perfect for the content we have. I would say Hitchcock, is something that has transcended. I loved him when I was 15 and I love him now. It's in keeping with my current job, Danger.
Yeah. Well, Hitchcock liked to flirt with the dangerous stuff, climbing around on Mount Rushmore and things like that.
Right.
I just watched 12 Angry Men last night, actually.
Oh, really?
And as my wife pointed out, and she's exactly right, that movie has stood the test of time. People are still the same as they are. That's Key Largo there, Edward G. Robinson. But 12 Angry Men is 12 guys. They're, like it could be shot today and have the exact same conversation they're having in there. There's a racist, there's a liberals, there's sports guys just wants to get to the baseball game, never mind the jury.
Was that black and white, Billy?
Yeah, black and white. It was
So
Sidney
you'd
Lumet's
still do
first
that
film.
black and white today?
You could do it in black and white, but the content, it basically all takes place in the jury room, where one guy votes not guilty against 11 guilties, and eventually they all end up not guilty. But the personalities all develop, and there's really, people haven't changed in the 50 years since that movie came out. A lot of the big actors from back then, they had the handsome guys too, Clark Gables or Cary Grants. But if you think about the Bogart, Cagney, and Edward G. Robinson, those guys were, they were men, but they weren't pinup guys. They weren't Brad Pitts. So today, in today's movies, I'm always glad to see when a guy, and I would include Brad Pitt in this, is handsome, but he's also a good actor.
Yeah.
Some of them aren't such good actors. They just play themselves in all the movies, and the scripts are written that way, and they're enjoyable. But Brad Pitt, I think, can actually play different kinds of characters.
Billy can probably name everybody in this picture. I can name Claire Trevor, and then Robinson's to the left. And Bogart's in the foreground, and Bacall over there. Who is the older actor?
Lionel Barrymore.
Lionel Barrymore. Who was the guy in the back? He was a character actor. You must remember
His
him.
name is Gomez. I forget his Thomas Gomez. Stable. The guy on the right with the hat, I don't know what his name was, but he's a really good character in that movie.
But if there was any emotion I would use to characterize or feelings that I have about my life, it would be gratitude. Because as I tell my kids, you've won lotto 10 times before you were born. And where they were born, who they were born from, they have loving parents, they're smart, they're attract, on and on and on. And similarly blessed. So when people think, oh my gosh, you're immigrants from Cuba, you came under duress. Yes, but I was totally unaware of it. My parents protected me from any negative experiences, and after that it's been one lucky thing to another. And obviously we all have ups and downs in our lives, and when, even like raising my kids, my main interest is making sure that psychologically they never suffer too much, or try and help them if they can, because those are the things that can impact all of us. Things don't go your way that you were totally counting on, etc. When you take, in my case, you take a summary of all of it, and there's just so much so much to be, grateful for. And spending time talking with you guys today, just, puts an exclamation point on that, because, all of these stories remind me just how much fun I've had and then how grateful I am.
I
Cut
always
off,
told
but I
my
will-
kids
Go ahead, Billy.
at bedtime growing up, I would say to them every night, "You're having a wonderful childhood," in case they ever ended up on a talk show.
Thanks for joining us
Casper,
today.
Billy
We
Harmon,
really appreciate your
Double
feedback.
Indemnity,
And please
Arky,
subscribe to the
Two
show
Outer,
and hit the
Claude
bell
Harmon,
icon so you get notified
Movie
of
Classics,
new episodes.
Mark Gable,
Hit them
Odd
hard
Job,
and hit them often.
Best 36 Holes.